What was the plan, the mentality, and kind of the catalyst that made you go from being at that level of athletics to saying, you know what, I'm going to go be a fucking knuckle dragger for a while and get my hands dirty for Uncle Sam?
Probably a lot. I've heard a lot of the guests that you've had on that are team guys, and like, when was the first time you've heard of like what the SEALs were and all that stuff? I don't know how I got it or why my parents got it for me, but I got a book called Weapons of the Navy SEALs.
Really?
When I was a kid. Must have been early 90s that I got that. Had dudes coming out like on their Draeger and, with their M4s or whatever they had at the time. And for whatever reason, I had that as a kid. And I always had this affinity towards, the service and the military. My dad was in the Army back when they still, I believe, had a draft. He was post Korea, pre-Vietnam, deployed over to Europe, where we were worried about Soviet encroachment from Eastern Germany and all that stuff. So he was never, a combat veteran, but an Army veteran. I don't think that really made the decision for me necessarily, but I always had this positive affinity towards it. And just like many other folks, like, the SEAL reputation of like it's the hardest military training out there, I was drawn towards that. Wanted to find, that whole adage, the only easy day was yesterday. I was drawn towards that. It was like my bug light, even when I was a kid. And then after my first Olympics, I sort of had a resurgence of that childhood dream of joining the Navy to be a Navy SEAL, and started investigating it more. Met some people that were in the teams. People were very gracious with their time to help me learn more about the Brotherhood and the community and what it was like to go through BUD/S and ultimately be a part of the team. Obviously, this is post 9/11, so is when, like, if you're going to sign up, you're almost guaranteed to go into combat, because we had essentially two theaters, maybe a global theater, frankly, but two primary theaters, Iraq and Afghanistan. Had some buddies of mine from high school, joined the Marines and all that stuff, and I felt if I was fortunate enough to go from being a small town kid to representing my country on the playing field, that I owed my country a debt of gratitude in the form of public service. And if I had the physical and mental tenacity to make it through, that I should sign up and do that when my country needed me. In a time of war. So all those things coincided. Spent a lot of time thinking about it. Had some people that similar to my younger years in swimming, told me that my ambitions were too high, and I sort of said, fuck you. I had some pseudo mentors of mine that told me that by joining the military I was throwing my life away. Wow. And that probably wasn't going to come home and all those kinds of things. They didn't have a history in it. They were elites from LA, and I think that was another catalyst. Well, like, I'm going to do it. And so going into the '08 games, I was 95% sure that was going to be my last games. I was going to be done. I was going to retire after that, and that I was going to join the Navy with the goal of being a Navy SEAL. Hadn't talked to anybody officially about doing that, but interestingly, at the '08 games, President Bush was there. And he was watching Team USA, and he was watching my events on the day one of swimming in the finals. And I earned the bronze medal in the 400 freestyle. And after the event, not only are you on the awards stadium, your podium, you get your medal, and you typically get like a stuffy animal. I don't know why they do that. Some Chinese stuffy animal I don't even know where that's at. I probably got rid of it. And a bouquet of flowers. And at the time, I didn't have a girlfriend, a spouse, or anything like that. Although my now wife was there watching her cousin, who, we can get into that in a minute. She's a very accomplished Olympian. She's a modern day Annie Oakley in trap and ski. Damn, Kim Rohde. Yeah, she's 6-time straight Olympic medalist. She's a shooting hero. And so, but I hadn't convinced her to date me yet. But who was there was the First Lady, Laura Bush, and President Bush was there as well. And so after that, we paraded around, the athletes paraded around the pool. And I climbed up the athlete bleachers to where the president was sitting and the First Lady, and I waved for the First Lady, Laura Bush, to come down because I was going to give her my flowers. Apparently, I was not super clear on who I was waiting for, and President George W. Bush walked down.
So you gave him the flowers.
No, I didn't. He shook my hand and said, hey, you did America proud. Thank you for representing our country and all this stuff. And I said, I appreciate that, sir, but I was actually not waving for you. I was waving for your wife. I want to give these to her. And I gave her my bouquet of flowers. And thanked her for coming, as sort of like the mom of America to,
Yeah.
support all of us. And she got choked up, like
Wow.
real, like, and I was like, it's something that was not pre-planned. You never really know if you're going to get a medal and all that stuff. And like, a lot of people just throw their bouquet into the stands. But I did that. And how this intersects with the SEAL team story is the president came back to spend time with us American athletes, with him, President Bush Sr., with Laura, and they were talking to us athletes. And he said, what are you going to do next? You going to go represent our country again? I'm like, yes, sir, but I want to do it in a different way. I'm going to be a Navy SEAL. And at that point, when you make a commitment to the president, it's like, all right, this went from 95% to like, we're fucking going. And that's the story of how that happened.
That is
and
so cool.
There's crazy other stories about that, where I was, invited to the White House to spend time with President Bush a couple times thereafter, out of just that single incident of generosity, I guess, or of just like, thoughtfulness that I wasn't really premeditated. It just sort of happened. And it's something that it's really remarkable.
What a cool fucking story, man. That is awesome.
Thank you.
Did he follow up or play any role in helping accommodate, a slot or anything like that?
Well, it's funny now that you bring it up. So I went back. I'm like, all right, I'm training. I'm being a Navy SEAL. So I'm at my apartment in LA in Manhattan Beach, training, doing beach runs, carrying rocks, whatever, reading. What's his name? Stu Smith's 20 Weeks to Buds or whatever it's called.
He's still going.
Yeah, it's still going. So read that, tried to get all my times. I'm like, all right, I'm like doing everything it says in the book. I'm going to the recruiting office and all this stuff. I'm working through this. I get a letter in the mail. It's a handwritten one-page letter. And the return address says, the White House. And I'm like, I better open this, wonder what this says. Open handwritten from the president. It says, the next time you're in D.C., call this number. I'd love to see you.
Wow.
And I'm just like, what the fuck? Who would have thought? And I'm obviously not in D.C., but I called the number. Nice Southern receptionist, because he's from Texas. A lot of people from down here in Texas who are with the administration. Oh, hi, Larsen. Been waiting to hear from you. Thank you for calling. Like, the president actually has has an availability at 9 a.m. on Thursday. Can you meet him at the White House? I'm like, yeah, I'll be there. And so booked my flight, flew out. And another one of those crazy experiences, one of two times this happened, where I showed up and said, checking in, I forget which gate it is, hey, I've got a 9 a.m. with the president. Sort of half thinking that they're going to be like, turn you away, all the Secret Service, their guns, and be like, who's going to let this knuckle dragger in here to meet with the president? Sure enough, went in and spent almost an hour with him in the Oval.
Wow.
And that's when he brought up, like, hey, you still doing the SEALs? I'm like, yes, I am. Putting in my package. He's like, hey, you need a letter of recommendation. I'm like, sir, I think I'm already going to have a target on my back from the instructors. The last thing I need is a letter from you. I appreciate it, but please do not say anything to anybody. I got it. Hopefully.
Fuck, I'd have taken it.
Yeah, maybe. But, I figured that it was, you know what it's like. You're an instructor. Everyone's looking for anything to extract out of you. The last thing I need is a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that one would have been worth it, though.
It might have been. It might have been.
But, man, that's so cool. So from that point, when you met with him until you actually got your package in, were accepted, and went through the whole process, how much time expired between that?
Not that much. So the Olympics were, I think, August of 2008. Started basically getting ready thereafter. LA Recruiting Depot, Los Angeles Recruiting Depot for the Navy, went in there and had that whole story like, hey, all right, son, what do you want to be in the Navy? You want to be an officer, all right? You got your college degree, okay. You can put in an OCS package, which was what I did. All right, son, fill out these 6 things that you want to do in the Navy. You could be, surface warfare officer, submarine officer. You'd be an aviator. You could, be in special operations. You can, NSW. And I wrote Navy SEAL for all 6. And whoever the nice, I don't know if he was nice, but the gentleman who was the senior chief recruiter is like, sorry, son, that's not how it works. You got to write 6. And I said, there's only one thing I want to do. I only want to be a Navy SEAL, nothing else. That's all I want on this thing. And so fortunately, he worked a lot with me. And the recruiters, I think, by and large, do a great job getting the right guys into the right places where they can make a difference and make an impact in the broader military. And so he worked with me. Worked with me on my PT scores, making sure I got my pull-ups where they need to be. Worked with me on my package, making
Get
sure
your swim time down a little bit.
Yeah, that was what I remember. They're like in the swim time. They're like, who the fuck is this kid? Had like the pre-buds or whatever. You have like the SEAL mentors, right? You get together and like you have somebody that's an old frogman there putting dudes through PT that's like gotten out. And you got like, whatever, a couple dozen guys getting some PT and stuff like that at a pool deck and doing flutter kicks and all that. So I did all that. And fortunately, got in my package, and then I got a phone call. It was April Fool's Day of 2009. And they're like, hey, this is the United States Navy, whoever it was, OCS needs you to report like next Monday, Newport, Rhode Island. Check it into OCS. I thought it was a buddy fucking with me, right? Because it's like April Fool's Day, this is sort of the thing that like, we would do, like somebody, like, and it's like a whatever random number, unknown block caller. No, I was serious. Like, be there. It's like, well, I got a lease to break, got all these things, but just like the Navy does, it started before even joining that this is like the hurry up and wait. Hadn't heard anything for months, had no idea what was going on. And then all of a sudden you got, 5 days to check in.
Yeah. Man, that's crazy. So you went straight in and
straight into OCS. I think I was. How was it? I forget how they. I think 2109. I guess that means probably the 21st class for OCS. Or I'm guessing of 09 of OCS. Maybe. And yeah, went through OCS.
Did you know right away that you had a bud slot? Like
you get the designator, but I had some surgeries, so. A few things I was worried about in my package, like I was passing all the test scores, but the Navy, they don't, they can put some traps in front of you that aren't real traps. I mean, probably similar to like your medical retirement. I was worried about like not medically being capable in their eyes. I knew I was fine, but I had my ACL done in college and it was fine. I was doing everything just fine. It was like 7 years prior. So I was a little worried about that, but yeah, I got, my 1130 designation that had the opportunity to go to BUDS. And so went through all the medical checks and all that stuff in OCS, and then with follow-on orders to go down to go down
when you showed up, expectation versus reality. This is something you've been thinking about for a number of years. Was it what you what you thought it would be cracked up to be, or did anything kind of surprise you?
Yeah, I mean you can read all you want about any topic out there, even right now in like our current line of work or whatever, until you actually go through it and you do it, it's just a different animal, right? Yeah. You can read all you want about, training dogs until you start training dogs. Like, what do you really know about it? Right. You sort of know a little bit. So there was enough material out there from all these guys, BUDS Prep and, all the books and the, 234 Discovery Channel show and all that stuff. And so I think knew a lot about what was in store. Knew the general progression of what Hell Week would be, like when Steel Pier was going to be and all that stuff, or at least that it was going to happen. Maybe not when it's going to happen, but that it was going to happen. So, but going through it's a different animal. Like you get there and you get assigned to a class. They have like 30 people in the class. You don't realize how many 230 people are until you're all running 4 abreast to the chow hall and you're doing this zigzag accordion with that many people. It's a lot of fucking people. And it's definitely an experience.
Yeah, you don't realize how many people that is until you're all nut to butt under
totally, man.
Station, getting ready to get in the pool. You were the class OIC, right?
I was. That happened in Hell Week because I think our first OIC quit.
Which is rare.
Which is rare.
Yeah.
And then our second one hyped out, and they're like, Jensen, you. And I'm trying to be the gray man. It's the deal. I'm trying to like be good enough, but not so good that I attract attention. But on the first beach run of Indoc, like that didn't work because they're like immediately on the bullhorn, hey, Navy SEAL, raise your hand. It's like, fuck. Hoo-yah, instructor, right? It's not like multiple hands are going up, or hey, Olympian, raise your hand. And it's like, shit, like, hoo-yah, here I am. And so get identified pretty quickly in that. And so I guess me being the gray man sort of like went out the window pretty quickly, like day one of Indoc. And then it was anointed begrudgingly OIC by the cadre during Hell Week.
Yeah, that's a job even back then. I mean, granted, I was also the youngest guy in my class.
Yeah. How old were you?
I was 18.
Oh shit! Yeah, we had a couple of those guys.
Yeah. And so, you know,
I don't know how they did it, man. He just
I mean, I think some of it is where I would say naivete actually plays to your advantage a little bit. You know, it's like you kind of don't even know what you don't know. You know, so I do think that there's a component that benefits you a little bit there. Also, just the vitality of being 18 and being able to just ruin your fucking body and bounce back the next day better than you can even at 25. But I remember seeing our OIC and just thinking like, oh my God, I'm glad I'm not him. You know, like that just seems like the worst fucking spot to be in as a bud student. Any huge hiccups as the OIC?
Not really. I mean, I think, you know, as an officer going into it, I guess sort of like some of the wisdom that I got from people that had done that, who were prior officers, or even from the senior enlisted, the chiefs. I lived next door to a SEAL chief who was retired, who would, you know, teach us the whole like, you know, meal to meal and getting through all these evolutions and stuff like that. Try not to think too big of a picture, because that's when you sort of like psych yourself out. All those normal things. But I think the key lesson that I learned from that is that I actually think the officers have an easier job.
Really?
I do. And at least in my experience. And I think that's not because it's like they get to do less. They are arguably made to do more in my case, because they're responsible. But I think that what I learned is if you're thinking about the well-being of the guys and thinking of the well-being of the class, you don't have the time in your mind to think about like your own suck as much and your own misery. Yeah. You don't have the time to be like a swimmer that I was, where you're stuck thinking about your own problems and your own discomfort. Your mentality is completely taken up by making sure that, like, if you're in charge of a boat crew, that's one thing. Like, making sure boat crew is doing the best they can and like is well optimized. And in terms of the class, the whole class is doing the best they can and, you know, rising to the occasion. And so I think in that regard, mentally it's easier, just because you don't have the mind space to think as much about how much you hurt. You still think about it, right? You can't avoid it. Like, you're still hurting, but I think it's sort of like pushed to the side a little bit. It's probably similar to being like on an operation, right? Like, you know, you don't have time to think about like your own discomfort, because you're thinking about everything else. Even if like afterwards you're just like, fuck, like I'm wiped, or that hurt, or I twisted my ankle, or whatever it is. You just don't have time to think about it because you're thinking about everything else that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting component I certainly hadn't thought of, but it absolutely makes sense. Obviously, you didn't have any trouble with the time swims. Did you break any records?
No. I still get shit for not making watermen's, right? But our second phase instructor, fuck, what was his name? So I probably should leave names off it anyways. But it was actually a day where the swim almost got canked because like the sea state was pretty rough. And I'm like, all right, I'm still going to get watermen on like the fucking worst sea state day. And didn't get it. And so like since then, everybody that comes through, or when I have had buddies that have been assigned to second phase, they take a picture of it and are like, your name's not up here. You're like fucking Olympian, like American record holder, and you can't make this. You're weak. You suck. I'm like, listen, but the second I try and explain it, you know how it goes.
Sure,
it doesn't. The worst thing you could do ever.
You could have got bit by a shark and it wouldn't fucking
doesn't matter. The second you try and caveat anything to anybody is the second they make it even worse on you. So I'm just like, you know what? Check. You're right. Like, I'm just awful. I suck. It is what it is. And it just takes the wind out of their sails. So just embrace it.
Did they end up putting these shittiest swimmers with you to try to carry them through?
A couple times. Like, there's some guys, some good dudes, right, that are just like, you know, weak swimmers, right? It's like, hey, this dude like needs some help to sort of like get through. Like, you know, there's never like they never said like, hey, if you fail, you're fucked. Like, but I think there's sort of a little bit of an understanding that like, hey, this is like a really good dude that's just not like the best swimmer. He crushes everything, but he's like, we can swim, you can pace him, right? And so like I definitely did that.
So obviously the swims were no problem, but did you find the amount of time that you spent in the water growing up and competing played a role in comfortability in the water for drown proofing, for pool comp,
100%.
And, you know, one thing that I will say challenged me, I did pass it the first time, but, I mean, I know it's a motherfucker for everybody, but is the treading with your hands out with the twin 80s, like, did you crush that?
Yeah,
no
I crushed
problem?
that pretty good. I was lucky on that.
But even pool comp, like, was not really any problem.
I mean, it's fucking hard. Don't get me wrong. Like, I was lucky. I passed the first time. I'm surprised they didn't fuck with me. You know how it goes, and just fail me just because I'm the Olympian, right? And those things definitely happened. But in that case, I did, and I skated through, and they made they passed me for whatever reason. Maybe I did a good job or not. But yeah, the water evolutions. It's not easy because it compounds, right? It's like throughout the week, like, in isolation, any of these swims or these water evolutions weren't that big of a deal for me, but you compound it with like, the log PT and the boats on heads and the O course. Like, I was Mrs. O course, right? I was Mrs. O's course, and I think it was second or third phase, like ran the risk of being rolled because I think I failed once, and I think you had 3 shots for us per evolution. And so I had like the slowest time in the class. They said, come to find out, one of my buddies who was like the PT officer or whatever, the guy who did all the things, like I actually wasn't the worst. There was a 4-0 who was worse than me. But still, he wasn't an American, so I got to wear Mrs. O course.
Yeah. That's fucking great. Pool comp is difficult, but it is also so much different. I mean, that's not swimming.
No.
Obviously, there's the biggest part of that is just being comfortable being uncomfortable underwater. Yeah. But it's neat to see that translation, I guess, between the amount of time you spend and it at least helping in that regard. Any other stories or things from buds that stand out as being super memorable for you?
I mean, definitely becoming Class OIC when I didn't ever want it was one of them. I wouldn't. In hindsight, I'd wish that on people, but at the time, I would never wish that on my enemy.
Right.
Like, it's just, you're a new guy, and you're coming into this, you're totally unfamiliar with this. I think going through buds in hindsight is probably one of the best times I've had in my entire life.
Same here.
My entire life.
Yeah.
The camaraderie, the shared experience, all of that stuff, and it's really good in a platoon as well. But there's something about just like the purity of buds and like the sort of like innocence of like what we're all getting into. The buds instructors, I think, were just legends in our eyes, right?
Yeah.
Combat, hardened dudes, decorated more than I ever was, and who just brave dudes who inspired us to take the fight to the enemy, and who actually were pretty outspoken about the fact that, like, we did join in a time of war.
Yeah.
And I think that's a uniqueness about our generation. I mean, who would have thought? Like, we joined 8+ years into the conflict, like our guys.
Yeah.
And who would have thought it would have gone on for another like 10 after that? Everyone was worried we were going to miss it and like not get a chance and all that stuff. And I think now the guys getting in, like they arguably might not, but you just never know how things are going to change. Yeah. But I think for our era, we joined in a time where like you could almost bet your bottom dollar you were going somewhere.
Agreed. I mean, it was something that I know I remember both being inspired by and impressed with, and also communicating to the students at a certain point. I mean, not on day one.
Totally not. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, to me, that says a lot. I mean, I joined pre 9/11, which, to me, there was also a neat element to that, in that I spent 4 years on a full workup and deployment prior to 9/11, and then afterwards as well. So seeing that kind of paradigm shift within the community was kind of neat to be able to see both sides too.
I imagine it was. I mean, what an experience. But I mean, I can't speak for everyone who joined, but I mean, when you have like the seriousness of our Medal of Honor recipients, and like I had those posted on my wall pre-joining, like reading those citations of Mike Murphy, Mike Mansour, and those guys, like, and it's just like, this is what I'm signing up for. Yeah. Like, I want to be a part of this brotherhood, and these are the guys who are like who sacrificed their life for their brothers and for their country. And like, that is something that I think is so deep and powerful that, I don't know, it's just hard to put into words. Yeah. And to be, fortunate to be, a part of the brotherhood, for a short period of time in my case, is just, it's more important to me than having been an Olympian. Like, my trident means more to me today than my Olympic medals, for sure.
Yeah, man, that's fucking awesome.